Welcome back into another episode of the Believe in Georgia Tech podcast. We are your co-hosts. That is RJ Schafer. I'm Jackson Caudell, coming to you Thanksgiving weekend and rivalry weekend. And to do clean old-fashioned, hey, we had to bring in none other than the film guy himself, Brooks Austin, to help us cover the Georgia game. Brooks, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good, man. We got Thanksgiving coming up tomorrow. I can't wait for some good food, man. I went on a 3-day water fast, just priming for Thanksgiving. Just priming, ready to absolutely tear it apart.
Well, if you're going to lead off with that, what's the plate looking like tomorrow?
See, I'm a ham over turkey guy. I think turkey's a little dry. Even when you fry it, like people are like, ooh, just dump it in a bathe of grease, and I'm like, I'm good on that. Yes, I'm a ham guy. I'm probably gonna go some stuffing. I was a dressing guy until I had stuffing from my father-in-law, who did it the right way. Actually stuffed the bird with the stuff, and it absolutely bangs. So probably gonna go some stuffing, some mashed potatoes. I'm gonna stay away from the green bean casserole, and just hang out with the staples, man. Give me some ham, give me some mac and cheese, give me some stuffing, and I'm good, man. We're good.
Absolutely. That sounds great. I'm glad you didn't say cranberry sauce because I was going to have to kick you off.
Yeah, no.
That's gross.
Yeah, but before we dive into the game, just kind of the usual housekeeping stuff. If you're watching this on YouTube, be sure to subscribe to the channel. We've grown a lot it's almost a year since we started the podcast and stuff. Last year, our first episode was the Georgia game. So we've grown a lot since then. We appreciate you guys subscribing. Be sure to like the video. Follow us wherever you do your podcast, Spotify, Apple. We love, just send us a review as well. We love all the support we've gotten. Also, RJ, how you doing, man? I didn't even talk to you yet.
Doing great, man. Hate week. Also excited for Thanksgiving. Our plates are a little bit different, but maybe that's just the Midwest culture.
Yeah, I guess so. Michigan plates are different than Georgia plates, I assume. So yeah, let's get to what we came here to do. We won't waste any time. We'll just kind of dive right in. Obviously, Georgia Tech, Georgia. It's a little different this year, Black Friday. I'm still not quite sure how I feel about that. It's a little different. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Brooks, or it's just, line up and play football. But
yeah, I get my Saturday back.
That's one good thing. Like I've had 2 straight Saturdays to myself, having a Thursday game last week, having a Friday game this week. There's a different feel around this one. I know the spread is at 20.5, which probably I feel like is a little surprising to some, just being how big it is. But I feel like the sentiment around Georgia Tech is this is the best chance they've had to win this game since 2016. Doesn't mean they're going to win it, but you're not walking in thinking, okay, this is going to be a 30-point blowout or a 40-point blowout or whatever. They've pulled some upsets this year, of course, beating Miami a couple weeks ago. I know, whenever we get the game notes from SIDs and stuff, it still lists, they have 2 top 10 wins versus Florida State. I do not consider that a top 10 win anymore. I don't know if Brooks does. He might still consider that a top 10 win. But we were kind of, wanting to talk about the matchup with you, kind of starting on the Georgia side. I know that the win-loss column's a little different than most coming into this game. In years past, it's been undefeated. Like last year was undefeated. I think like 3 straight years it's been undefeated. I've pointed to more of the schedule, but is there something, different with this team than in the past that's, kind of led them to the 2 losses? I know it's, losses to Alabama and Ole Miss are nothing to hang your head over, but, what's been different?
Yeah, they've I would say struggled with consistency all year long. Now they're arguably peaking at the right time. They've played some of their best football over the last several weeks. Since they've gotten back home, right, playing Tennessee and UMass. Defensively, it didn't look good against UMass, but I think it was a lack of preparation and a lack of, willingness to show up and strike. But you talked about it. The schedule was brutal. I think going into it in the year, everyone kind of assumed they'd drop at least one. They didn't know which one it was going to be. I think most people said if you survive 10-2, good season we'll see in the playoff. No one wants to play you. And that's exactly where we're at right now. But man, it's weird, man. Georgia struggled and lost games for various different reasons, right? Against Alabama, they start out, offense turns the ball over twice in the first half. They're very stagnant offensively. Alabama's exploding. So the offense and defense played like crap to start that football game, and then settled in, crawled back in that one, eventually got a lead in the fourth quarter, but ultimately lost that football game. And then the Ole Miss game, it was like, well, our offensive line's not going to show up today. We're going to get dominated at the line of scrimmage. That wide receivers have dropped the football this year. Quarterbacks played bad at times. It's like the whole offense has kind of done this, and the defense has just not been as good. They're still great. You're still a top 15 defense in the sport with the schedule. It's just not the typical Georgia standard, right? Georgia standard is sub 13 points per game. They're not at that right now, and I don't think anybody would have survived that with the schedule that they had. I mean, they've played, I think, 4 top 10 offenses in the sport of college football this year. Like, you're going to give up points, dude. That's the way it is.
Yeah, and I know this Georgia Tech fans might not want to hear this, but watching the rankings last night, Georgia should be ranked higher than what they are. The fact that they're behind Miami, Penn State, Notre Dame is just sure.
I think it'll solve itself out there with that, man. You would hope so, at least.
Yeah. So one thing I did want to ask you, going into last week, you had no idea. You probably weren't going to make the SEC title game. Then a bunch of crazy crap happened, and now you are going to. Do you think that because I went into it like, okay, Georgia Tech is a playoff game for Georgia. Like, they have to win this game to get to the playoff. If they lose it, they're at risk of falling out completely. That's not entirely true anymore. Do you think that changes the dynamics of this game in any way, or it's just business as usual?
Yeah, I mean, it is coach speak, and it sounds like coach speak. But when you're around that program, you understand that they live what they talk about with regards to this stuff, and it is every day. Every day you get up and you do the day's task. You don't worry about what's next. You don't worry about what's on the down the road. And I'm sure Brent Key talks about this as well. Great coaches do, right? We want to handle the task at hand. We don't want to worry about what we can't control. All we can control is today. That kind of nonsense. But I think when you're talking to 19 to 23-year-olds, that message is important. Like, you have to continue that, and you have to live that, and you have to breathe that. And I think this football program does a really good job of doing that. I don't necessarily know if much changed about this football game. Man, look, ever since they lost to Ole Miss, they've been in a win-out scenario no matter what. I think they feel like they're in a win-out scenario even in the SEC championship game. I think they feel that way. I think if they feel like if they lose or if they beat Georgia Tech and lose an SEC championship game, they're not in a college football playoff. I think they're approaching life like that. And I love that that's where we're at. I mean, it's a 12-team college football playoff, and it's expanded. It's allowed room for error, right? You can get in with a couple of losses. But when it comes to late November, when it comes post-Thanksgiving, this sport, college football, ought to have a feeling and a sense of, shit, we got to win this one or we're going home. Yep. And if it doesn't, I feel like we're doing this sport a disservice. Like, we used to, you had to pursue perfection. And if you didn't maintain perfection, you can only take one blemish. That's what we used to live under. And now we're like, hey, which one of these 3 loss teams deserves the right? None of them. None of them. So win out and go home. Win out or go home. That's the way it ought to be, I think.
Anything from that, RJ, or are you ready to dive into personnel?
I feel the exact same way.
Okay. Well, so I guess I want to start with the offense. And, you know as well as anyone, like, something like has seemed off about Carson Beck. Now, I think some of it's been a little bit overblown. Like, I know 12 interceptions and everything, but he's still one of the top passers in the SEC. And I think the Tennessee game kind of proved to everybody, like, hey, he can still go out and win a football game. And, like, I wouldn't just be writing him off completely. What's been different about him this year? And is he kind of starting to play his best football at the right time?
The people around him, Jackson, to be honest with you, like, this is a quarterback who's going to do most of his damage from inside the pocket. So you got to have a clean pocket, right? They failed to do that ad nauseum this year. They are not pass protecting as well as they have in years past. That's improved since Monroe Freeling has been moved into left tackle for these guys, the redshirt freshman out of South Carolina. It's improved, but you got to have good protection for a quarterback who does most of his damage from the pocket, right? He's also a great decision maker, which means when you're open and your number is called, you got to catch the ball. They lead the nation in drops. Like, they're the Division I leader in drops, not FBS, Division I. They lead the nation in drops. The University of Georgia does. Okay, so the run game, like, you got to be a balanced football team. They have a 0 explosive run game right now. Georgia does. I can't tell you. Actually, I can. The longest rush of the year is a 50-yard end around. It's a reverse by Anthony Evans. The longest rush on the roster comes from a wide receiver. That's not Georgia football. So like everywhere else around Carson Beck has deteriorated this year, and it's not the end of the world. They can still go out and win football games. They're still a top, I'd say 15 offense in the sport right now, all things considered. But yeah, man, like you're seeing deterioration in his performance because you're seeing deterioration around him. Now, when we're talking about a football player that going into the season, people are talking about being a top 5 pick. But if you're a quarterback drafted in the top 5, we're drafting you to be an elevator. That's what we're doing. We're drafting you in a bad situation because we think you can come in here and parts be damned, you're going to make the machine run better, right? Well, that's not what happened this year. Carson did not elevate the roster around him. Once the roster around him got better and started to play better, they beat the shit out of Tennessee. Awesome. But that means you can be a top 25 selection, and he will be. He's going to be a first-round draft pick this year because I think of what the quarterback, market looks like in the NFL. But, man, his performance has dropped because the overall offensive performance has dropped. And this isn't some creator, right? This isn't some guy that can go out there and make, chicken salad out of chicken what. It's not what this guy is.
Anything on Beck there, RJ?
Yeah, I think he is, honestly, my opinion on him throughout the year changed because through the first, probably 6 weeks of the season, I saw what I thought Carson Beck was, but I think he's been able to not only manage a game, he's been able to do more than that, which is honestly more than I expect out of him. I do think he is a first-round level talent player. I think he will get picked, or at late first area. But I think there still are question marks, and I think there still are, areas where he's not, full-fledged or, fully fleshed out as a quarterback.
Yeah.
So it surprised me when I was looking, when I watch him and then you look through the stats and they're 98th in rushing offense. But Brent Key talked about it a little bit. I asked him about the offense. He's like, they're still going to try to run the ball. Like they are absolutely going to try to set the tone and run the ball. How do you view, I'm sure you've watched a little bit of Georgia Tech's defense. It's an improved unit. It's not an elite unit, but it's a whole lot better than it was last year with the new coach and staff. How do you view Georgia's offense trying to attack this Georgia Tech defense on Friday night?
Hey, don't be hating on my boy Andrew Thacker now. Don't be doing that. No, I think they're much improved, and I think they're opportunistic, right? I don't know what their turnover margins are, but and no different than their offensive system, they make the right play when they need to. Here's an example. A football team's in 2nd and 6, okay? It's a rundown, right? How can we do our best to create a negative? How can we make sure this turns into a 3rd and 9 instead of a 3rd and 3? Okay, that, in my opinion, is what Georgia Tech has improved the most upon from last year. Also, it really helps your defense when your offense is out here playing anaconda football. When they're out here squeezing the life out of the opponent and squeezing the time off the clock, you're not going to have a ton of possessions to have to get up there and stop. All right, so they haven't allowed 40 points at all this year because here's why. I think opposing this is something you probably guys should know or could know. How many average possessions is an opponent getting when they play Georgia Tech? Like 9 or 10?
Yeah, I was going to say it's probably like 10.
Yeah, like most football games in college football, you're getting 13, 14 possessions in a football game. So to go out, it's math, guys. To go out and score 40 points, I got to score a touchdown on like 70% of my possessions against Georgia Tech. That's really hard to do. Like, it's really hard to do against air. You go out there on air, it's going to be hard. So, yeah, the defense has improved. You've done some good things in the portal. I love number 44. Neck roll, Tatum.
Kyle Eford.
Eford.
That's his name. My man from Decula. Is that where he's from?
I want to say yes. I'll have to confirm that, but yeah.
Holy hell. Love it. I mean, probably close for a targeting call every single football game. But if my Mike linebacker ain't on the verge of a targeting call, I don't know if I want him. So, yeah, I love what Georgia Tech's done defensively. But I think you have to start that conversation with, buddy, they run the rock on offense. Yep. So you're going to have a much, much improved defensive, group.
Yeah, like speaking of targeting calls, like he had a really, really close call. He probably should have been called for targeting in the second half of NC State near the end of that game. And I was like, oh my God, he's going to miss the first half of the Georgia game. And like the run defense is just so much better. Like with him, and they rotate a lot of their linebackers with Trinilius Tatum, Jackson Hamilton, former Bulldog EJ Light. So he's gotten a lot of playing time here down the street. But I kind of want to talk about the pass catches a little bit because I'm used to. It's mostly just Brock Bowers, but I'm used to Georgia using a lot more of their tight ends. Is there a reason the tight ends have not been involved as much in the passing game? And who's kind of the receiver, that's kind of been dependent on the most? I know Arian Smith's kind of the deep guy, but he's had trouble with drops. Kind of just what's the situation with the pass catchers?
So Kyle Eford is indeed from Decula High School. The tight ends, man. So here we go. I think a lot of football teams, from what I've seen on tape this year, have added a safety into the box, meaning they're running a lot of middle field closed coverage. Okay, so there's a safety standing in the middle of the field. If I put a safety in the middle of the field, you're probably not going to get to your tight end, right? You're probably not going to be able to get him open. You'll also see a lot of football teams thinking that they can do that to Georgia because they don't have weapons that scare them on the outside, right? If you're playing single high safety, you don't have a lot of help over the top. You're doing that because you don't think you need the help over the top, and you can add the bodies to the box and stop the run. The one team that came out and played middle field open coverage, two high safeties, was 2 weeks ago against Tennessee. Tennessee comes out, plays two high safeties for the first half of the football game. Now all of a sudden, Oscar Delp and Ben Urasic are part of the game plan. What you have to understand about Georgia's offense is they're not like Tech. Tech is a we do what we do offense. Okay, Buster's going to expose the defense for doing what they're doing. He's going to attack the coverages that they're playing, like every good coordinator. But that's the basis of what Georgia does. Georgia comes out. They have their first possession scripted like everybody else. But the script is dependent upon what the opponent is doing. They're a pro-style offense. That's what pro-style offenses do. If you line up and you play middle field closed, they're not going to throw into the middle of the field. They're not going to force feed a player because they feel like they have to. That's just not what they've ever done. So whatever Tech wants to allow Saturday is what Georgia will attack. That's what they've always done. So at least since Monken's been here. Prior to Monken and Bobo, I don't know what was going on. Actually, I do. I know what was going on. There's a lot of coordinators in this world that watch a lot of football, and they'll go, ooh, that worked for that team. And then they'll bring it to their team. And then next thing you know, by the end of the year, you've got a whole identity of what other people do. You don't have an identity of what you do. And that was the problem prior to Monken and Bobo. And they do the same thing now. It's the same offense that Monken was running schematically, conceptually. It's the same thing.
Talking bad about former Georgia Tech analyst for a year, Jim Chaney.
Oh, no, I was taking a shot at James Coley, who's currently on the staff. But thanks for making me say his name.
You're welcome. Anything on that, RJ?
Well, I just wanted to ask you, is this like the weakest, the Georgia pass catching, has been, pass catchers have been in the past 4 or 5 years? Because I feel like you have a lot of good slot guys, a lot of, possession guys, for lack of a better term, but you don't really have like the outside threat like you've had, the past couple of years.
Yeah, going into the season, I think it was fall camp. Robert Thomas gets in trouble, and he ain't coming back. And then Colby Young gets in trouble, and it looks like he might come back, but you lose 2 6'3", 220 or 210 pound plus X receivers. I mean, Georgia doesn't recruit well enough at wide receiver to take those blows. Never has, probably never will, as long as Kirby Smart's here and as long as NIL works like it does. Like, they're not going to pay out of market for a wide receiver. They never have. They probably won't. I think the debacle down there at Florida State allowed them to get back into the mix with CJ Wiley. But no, man, I don't. The lack of pass catchers has always been a thing here. Every year, you know what the number one article I've written every single time is, will Georgia have a 1,000-yard receiver? Will Georgia have a 1,000-yard receiver this year? Every year we write it. We'll have to write it next year too. We'll have to write it next year too because they didn't do it this year. So No, man, I think what has really surprised me is the amount of drops. It's just it makes no sense. They're ridiculous drops too. It's not a lot of like, okay, maybe that's on ball placement or wow, DB did a great job there. No, these are wide ass open, ball hits you in the face mask and falls to the ground. Like, what are we doing? I can't explain that stuff. And Georgia fans will go, well, we need to fire the wide receivers coach. I'd say no. I played a lot of football in my day. I've been around a lot of college football practices. Never in my life do we spend time as a wide receivers coach teaching you how to catch the ball. That ought to be something that comes as a prerequisite. You're a wide receiver. It's in your name. You should receive the ball. You should be able to catch. If you can't, like we spend Monday through Thursday developing the game plan. We spend Monday through Thursday, teaching routes and teaching separation and doing all that stuff. We don't teach you how to catch the ball, man. So but no, it's been the lack of elite talent at that position is why James Coley, in my opinion, was brought back. Like James Coley, if he does anything, it's recruits well.
Yeah.
And he's done that. I mean, they're going to sign in a week. They're going to sign C.J. Wiley and Taylor. It's the highest combination of wide receivers they've signed since 2019.
Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know that I knew that. But before we move over to defense, I just kind of want to ask you, what's a matchup you feel that is heavily in Georgia's favor on offense? Maybe what's a matchup that worries you, if there is one at all?
Nick Singleton scares the ever-loving shit out of me as a defensive coordinator. He would scare me because he can get on top of you immediately. And Buster does a great job of not overusing the explosives from Singleton. Like, they don't just sit there all day and run slot fades.
Yeah.
But you're going to get 3 or 4 of them. You're going to see them. And if he catches 2 or 3 of them, they're in scoring position immediately. If you don't get them down, he scores. So he scares me, but in terms of, or would scare me if I were a coordinator. In terms of a matchup that favors Georgia, I think Buster has done a tremendous job. Hiding the offensive line sounds like they're bad, and I don't want to say it like that. So I'll say it this way. He does a great job of making sure his offensive line doesn't have to win their one-on-ones consistently, right? They do a lot of RPOs. They do a lot of moving, or what I call manipulating the launch point, right? Moving the quarterback out of the pocket and having him throw on the run. Doing all those things and running the football really well through a very diverse run scheme. However, last year's football game, I think, showed us that you can only hide an offensive line. You can only scheme them out of the equation so much for a football game. Eventually, havoc plays will be created. And I think that's what really won that football game defensively for Georgia last year, was having guys like Warren Brinson and having guys like Smile Mondon in the backfield in the run game and creating 2nd and 12s. Because the moment you get a pseudo option offense, which is what Georgia Tech feels like sometimes, the moment you get them behind the sticks and require them to throw the football, even though Philo's made some incredible throws this year, if you put the feet or the game at the feet of the quarterback, I think Georgia Tech's going to be in trouble. And I think that's what's going to happen.
Yeah. Anything on that, RJ?
I think Philo's capable too. I think that could be a recipe for disaster if Georgia Tech's behind the sticks, every single drive. Like, that's where I could see the 20-point spread coming in favor. Georgia wins by 24.
I did a film study on Georgia Tech's offense, and I loved Philo coming out of high school, and I still do. Yeah. I think he's going to be. I think he's got NFL traits. I think he's going to be an NFL quarterback. That being said, he's still a freshman. I mean, he made 4 or 5 turnover-worthy throws against NC State that don't show up in the box score because they didn't end up in interceptions, but they're all over the tape. I mean. Yeah. He's still not very late. He's late to reads. He holds the ball a little bit too long. He's doing things that freshmen are supposed to do. And he's getting away with it sometimes because he's got elite arm talent. I think that's the thing that people he goes to Georgia Tech, so people don't know this about him nationally. But this is a really, really traitsy football player. He's 6'2", he's 215 pounds, and he's got an absolute cannon. Like, he can make every throw, and he's athletic, right? I love Philo. I just think this year is not the one. I think it's the next 2 years for Philo that are going to be really, really impressive if Buster stays at Georgia Tech.
Right. Like, I think they have to roll with one quarterback. Like the two quarterback thing is just like it worked against Miami because I don't know that Miami was ready for it, and then like Miami did a horrific job adjusting to that. Like just you knew that King could only run, you knew Philo could only pass, and they did nothing to adjust for it. NC State did. Like Georgia Tech really couldn't move the ball really until that last drive consistently on offense. Like I think you got to roll with one here this Friday, and I assume it'll probably be Philo. I think I just don't know that King can give you enough through the air, but I'm assuming you're kind of thinking the same thing as well. Like the two quarterbacks is just not going to work versus Georgia. It's just not.
It did last week against UMass, I think that's because I think UMass was out here. I think UMass put a game plan together on Monday when they fired their football coach, and it was like, hey, let's just put something together. Let's do something that they've never seen before and hope it works. And that's exactly what happened in that first half. Like you could see UMass players busting assignments on offense, like quarterbacks turning the wrong way, running backs not being in pitch phase. And you're like, well, why is that happening? Well, because it's new for them too. I don't think what Georgia Tech's putting on film right now are going to show up with on Friday is going to be relatively new. So I think they're going to be pretty prepared, like you said. I don't mind the two quarterback systems at Georgia Tech because I understand that, and I haven't talked to anybody on Georgia Tech staff to confirm this. So I'm speaking from what I think. I think there's a lot of loyalty to Haynes King. I think what happened last year for that offense and the turnaround in that program, I think you could give a lot of credit for that to Haynes King's performance at quarterback. And when you go out with an injury as a quarterback, I don't know if you automatically lose your job just because the other guy's playing good. You know what I mean? I think you have to have it taken from you. And maybe that's what happened last week. Maybe it was taken from him. Maybe Philo took the opportunity to become the full-time starter. And maybe that's what we see this week. But since he's been hurt, man, you guys watch him far more closely than I do, obviously. But I could see it on tape. There's a hesitancy with him to keep the football. There's a hesitancy with him to make plays with his legs right now because he is banged up. And when we're like 70% as efficient as we were when we were healthy as a runner, then we probably can't play you consistently. You know what I mean? So, yeah, I'm with you. I would, if I were Buster, I'm probably going into this riding it out with Philo.
Yeah, just seeing what happens. You could see it last week just on what you're talking about. Like he carried the ball like 20 times against. Like he was a glorified running back against Miami. Like he was not a quarterback. He was like 3 for 3 for like I think 9 yards. Like I mean he's completed 10 passes in the last 2 games and he has like 20 yards passing.
And he wasn't. I know he had a couple of explosives, but he wasn't super effective. You know what I mean? Like he wasn't making guys miss. He wasn't taking care of the additional defender that's going to be there for you. And that's your requirement. Like if you're going to be the ball carrier, we've got to take care of the free hat. And he failed to do so over and over again. And I think that, like I said, I think it's because he is still relatively hurt. I don't think he's 100%.
No, I don't either. Anything on that, RJ?
Yeah, I think you have to. I think you have to rock Philo no matter what. I mean, obviously, King throughout the time of the season, has been the better quarterback. But regarding the injury, regarding the fact that, like you kind of alluded to it, like he's honestly scared running the ball sometimes because if you land wrong on that shoulder, I mean that's probably the season for him, right? Like he probably won't be able to play the rest of the season. I think you have to rock with
It's
Philo.
his non-throwing shoulder, right, guys?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I mean, it's for him, but I think you have to do what gives you the best chance to win. And I don't think a 2-quarterback system with a quarterback that can't throw 10 yards is going to get you anywhere.
Yeah. A couple more things before we get you out of here. I did want to talk not solely about the UMass game, but just the way they were able to run the football. Like everybody knows, Georgia Tech likes to run the football. Did that give you a little bit of worry about what Georgia Tech might be able to do, or do you just chalk it up to they didn't care about UMass or something else?
I talked about it. I think there was a little lack of preparedness because what you're preparing for something you don't know that's coming in, right? When they fire the head coach midweek, like you're drawing straws as to what they're going to do. Now, here's what concerned me. And, not having responsibilities for the quarterback on read options against a team that maybe hadn't shown that. I understand that. Okay, when you let up a 45-yard explosive to start the football game because there's no one having responsibility for the quarterback, I understand that. Again, it's a game plan. We didn't know we had to plan for that, so we're going to get a little bit shocked by that. But here's what really concerned me. This has nothing to do with game plan. UMass's offensive line was getting to the second level. They were getting hats on linebackers against Georgia. SEC teams don't do that. SEC teams don't move defensive linemen from Georgia and put them into the lap of the linebacker and then get off of him and get to the linebacker. Like, the last team to do that against Georgia was Alabama in the SEC championship game last year, and they ran all over them. So, yeah, it concerned me a little bit. But when the head football coach comes to the microphone afterwards and was like, clearly we were not prepared to strike today. Clearly we were not prepared to come out and fight on the lines of scrimmage on the defensive side of the football. That tells me he's going to spend an entire week, or in this case, 6 days, just absolutely lambasting that defensive line. Okay, so that defensive line is going to come out nice and pissed off. And yeah, that would – when Georgia lays an egg defensively, they did this a couple weeks back against Mississippi State. They give up 31 points against Mississippi State. And everybody's like, oh, my God, they got Texas next week. What's going to happen? They're going to come out and play some damn football. I think that's going to happen again this weekend. There's no way Georgia's defense lays 2 eggs in a row.
That was literally my thought. I didn't watch any of that UMass game. I just couldn't pull myself to do it, even though they were losing. But that was my thought as well. Like, I saw some sentiment on social media. Oh man, if UMass is doing this, Georgia Tech's gonna 200-yard rush. I'm like, I don't know about that. Like, it's gonna be a hell of a bloody Tuesday up there. Is what I was thinking. So,
bloody Monday.
Bloody. I guess because again,
bloody Monday.
I'm still getting the Black Friday. Anything on that, RJ, or anything you wanted to add?
Nope.
Okay. So we'll get you out of here on a prediction. I assume I know what you're rolling with, unless you just pull an all-time shocker right here. Who wins the game and why?
You need to go watch Unless It Doesn't Happen on last night's show segment. We had a ball. I
got to catch up on your show today.
You do. It was really, really funny. No, I think this football game is going to feel a whole lot like it did last year, where it's like, damn, it's pretty close. Tech's handling this thing like they're in this, and then they won't be. I think it's like a 31-17 football game. I don't like the 21-point spread. I think it's at 19.5 now. It's already dropped. I don't love that because, again, to beat Georgia Tech by 21 points, you're going to have to 3-and-out them like 5 or 6 times because they hold the ball so long. Like, even I don't think there's a version of this football game where it's like 42-10, unless they're just completely made anemic in terms of running the football as Georgia Tech. Now, here's what would concern me if I'm a Tech fan listening to this. Y'all have a lot of window dressing, okay, pre-snap motion, a lot of stuff that doesn't travel when you go on the road, particularly in front of 94,000 people, 93,800. It doesn't travel very well because people are loud. They're screaming. So all the pre-snap motion and having offensive linemen sit in their stance for 20 seconds, like, that's not ideal, okay? And you can see it in the home road splits for Tech. I think they're 5-0 at home, and all their losses come on the road. Now, here's why. Their run splits are totally different on the road. They don't run the football as effectively on the road, and the reason that is, in my opinion, is because you can't do all that window dressing. And Buster does a great job of sending motion and creating advantages off of the motion, right? We're going to send a wide receiver across the formation. We're going to condense one side, and then we're going to run to the side that we've now condensed with the motion. It's hard to do that on the road. So I really worry about Tech's ability, not just because of the talent, mismatch that's on the lines of scrimmage, but the ability, or the inability rather, to be as exotic as we are at home on the road. That would concern me for a football team like Tech.
Yeah, so me and you almost have the exact same score prediction. I have 34-17. I agree with you about the running game stuff. And when Tech doesn't run the ball well, they usually don't win. The only game I can tell you is last week against NC State, and that was more of an NC State thing. The matchup that worries me, honestly, is Georgia's passing game. Like, I know there's been inconsistencies with the receivers. Carson Beck's had some turnover stuff. But against good passing attacks, Georgia Tech has come up short, and it's generally because they can't rush the passer. I mean, they did get after C.J. Bailey a little bit last week, but NC State, Georgia are just two very different things. Like Georgia Tech just does not rush the passer very well. They don't create a ton of turnovers. Again, last week aside, they held Cam Ward Miami to 23 points, but also Cam Ward threw for 350 yards, and they just didn't execute on third and fourth down. I mean, Miami was 3 of 10 on third down in that game, like 1 of 5, I think, on fourth down. They had a ton of possessions in Georgia Tech territory, and they just come up short. Maybe that happens again. Like that, to me, how they stop Georgia's offense is hoping Carson Beck turns the ball over and that kind of thing. I just don't know that they're going to be able to move the ball consistently enough because, like you were saying about the run game on the road, the only time they've run the ball well on the road is against North Carolina, and I don't like North Carolina's defense is an absolute joke. Like they didn't run it against.
Shout out on Geoff Collins, baby.
Yeah. I know the minister of mayhem. The only time, even against bad defense, like Syracuse defense is terrible. Georgia Tech couldn't run the ball. Louisville's defense is solid. They couldn't run the ball. But, yeah, typically on the road, they haven't run the ball very well. All the points you made are correct. I would not be shocked, but it would, even if they roll with Philo for the majority of the game, I just have a hard time seeing a true freshman quarterback go into Athens and win a night game, especially when Georgia has to win this game. Like they absolutely have to win this game because if you lose this game, there is a chance you lose next week too, then you're out of the whole thing together. So I do think they'll be fired up for this one. I've got 34-17. I don't think it'll be just a runaway game. I do think it'll be tight for a little bit, but I do think Georgia's just the talent across the board just helps them pull away.
Too well coached is Georgia Tech to just get blown out of the water.
Yeah.
I think. I didn't feel that way under the previous regime, but this one certainly.
Yeah, it's a little different. The only time I can remember them really just getting and it was when he was an interim coach. They went down to Florida State. It was after they lost the game to Virginia. They got 45-16 or 13. It was my first year covering them. They got absolutely blasted, but they typically don't just get run over from start to finish. It's kind of like a slow thing over time. Even against Notre Dame, they get out to a lead against Notre Dame, and then you didn't have Haynes King. You played Zach Pyron all game, and that just offense wasn't going to do anything. But even then, it was a 16-point loss. Zach
Pyron's a fun story, and I don't have very many opportunities to talk about this one, but I'm on a Georgia Tech podcast, so I'm going to do it. This was before COVID, so this was February of 2020. I think Zach Pyron was a junior in high school. He was playing in a school in Birmingham that was a triple option offense. So he was throwing the ball 8 times a game. And I was watching him warm up, and I'm watching him throw this ball at a Dex Preps camp out there in Birmingham. It's my first time ever really indulging myself in recruiting. Again, this is 4 years ago. And I'm watching him throw the ball, and I'm like, holy hell, who is this kid? So I walk down. He's big too. I walk down there. I'm like, hey, where do you go to school? And he tells me, and I watch his highlight tape. And I don't recommend ever that guys transfer. It's not my job. It's not my job to tell you to get out of somewhere and go somewhere else. But I told him, I said, man, you can throw the football like a Division I football player. You might want to go somewhere where they're throwing the ball, man. And next thing you know, he transfers to Kool-Aid McKinstry's high school, okay? And he damn near sets records throwing the football in the state of Alabama. And now all of a sudden he's at Georgia Tech, and I'm like, I still think he's a good football player. I know it doesn't seem like it's going to work out at Georgia Tech. He's probably going to be one of the thousands in the portal because he needs to go play somewhere. But good football player. And one of those prime examples of, man, maybe it might be good for you to get out of here and seek other options. And I think that story really settled in for me. It's every kid that transfers isn't a quitter. Every kid that transfers isn't somebody that you need to avoid like the plague, okay? Some of these kids transfer because it's a business decision. It's the best decision for them and their family, and you have to look at every single one as an opportunity. Now, when they've got 4 transfers in 4 years, red flag. Let's red flag that one.
Barry Alexander.
Yeah, Georgia's 0 for 3 right now with 4 high school transfers. Okay, Jermaine Burton, Barry Alexander, Dylan Raiola.
Yeah.
Now I know Dylan Raiola didn't enroll, but he decommitted a week before signing day. So, they're 0 for 4.
And I know it sounds cliche, but I'll just back the Zach Pyre and talk up like that kid busts his ass all the time. Like he is one of the harder working kids I've been around covering tech. Like he's super good guy. But I guess let's wrap the show up. RJ, you have a chance to be the contrarian hot take guy right here. The floor is yours.
Yeah, I know I did that Notre Dame week. Made a prediction I didn't really believe in. And I'm going to preface my prediction by saying I don't think the final score will be indicative of how out of reach this game will be. I just think when you have Aaron Philo in, I think he's a great quarterback. I don't think the nerves are going to be there. I don't think you're going to be able to stand in front of almost 100,000, what's going to be mostly Georgia fans, and be able to take that pressure for 4 quarters. I think the game might start out close, and I think the final score will end close. I'm going to say 14-28. But I don't think there'll ever be a point in time where it's, fourth quarter, Georgia Tech's down by 7, they have the ball, and you're thinking they could win it. I don't really see an opportunity for that to happen this week.
Yep. Any final thoughts from anybody here before we wrap this up?
No, man, I'm excited. I'm glad that this rivalry is. I know it's a 19.5 point spread, but it feels like Georgia Tech's on the right path. And here's what I want to leave you with, because I do cover a lot of recruiting for Sports Illustrated, and I cover this state really well on the high school rankings. Georgia Tech is finally doing what Georgia Tech has needed to do for the last 20 years, which is, okay, we're never going to get into head-to-head recruiting battles with Georgia. We probably need to avoid that. We're not going to beat them for 5 stars in our state. So here's what we need to do. We need to make sure Clemson's not coming down here and raiding Metro Atlanta. We need to make sure South Carolina's not coming down here and raiding Metro Atlanta. Hell, Kentucky has come down here into Atlanta and recruited really, really well over the last decade. We need to border up our state outside of Georgia takes, and everybody else we need to hammer in on. Now, we don't need to be paying $800,000 a year for a 265-pound offensive tackle. I'll say that. But signing 16 of your 21 players, I think it's 22 commits in 2025 right now. Is that right?
Yes.
16 of those football players from the state of Georgia. You're going to win a lot of games in the ACC if you do that, okay? Because you're relinquishing the other team's abilities to come into this area of the state, which is super populated with great football players. You're inhibiting that, and that's a great thing for Georgia Tech. And I think, I don't know if the best is yet to come for Brent Key, because I think, losing Buster Faulkner is inevitable at this point. I think eventually that guy's going to get a really, really big time head coaching opportunity. I think him interviewing for that Georgia State job last year was my indication of that. He wasn't taking that Georgia State job, guys. He was interviewing for that job to see what the interview process was like, because I would imagine he's going to get heavily involved in the interview process this round. The safe part for Tech right now is that there's no big jobs open, right? It's just North Carolina, and that's it. And I don't think he's in the running right now for the North Carolina job. But that Oklahoma OC job would probably scare me. Okay, there would be some other high-profile OC jobs that would scare me, but I think Buster's going to wait around and do the right thing and go for the first head coaching job that's right for him. And maybe it's not this cycle, maybe it's next.
Yep, 100%. I'm glad you touched on that about recruiting, because I was going to ask you. I didn't know if we ran out of time, but that is a great point. So we appreciate you coming on, Brooks. Like, there's nobody else we'd rather have on to preview Georgia. Just before we wrap up here, same thing at the top of the podcast. Just subscribe to the channel. We're near 700 now. We're near 700 subscribers. Get there. Like the video. Follow us wherever you get your podcast. We appreciate you guys tuning in. Should be a fun game Saturday or Friday. I'm still getting used to that. I hope everybody can come out. Appreciate you guys for listening.